everyone, and welcome to this webinar on storing and sharing qualitative social data. I'm Dr. Deanne Bird, and I've been leading this project in conjunction with Lindsay Wright and Don Sharples. I'd like to start today by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands of which we're coming from. For me, that is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I also extend that respect to the traditional owners of the lands of which you're all on today, and also to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us. This project came about because the Centre aims to be a leader in the careful, ethical, safe and appropriate application of the fair and care data principles to natural hazards and disaster research involving human subjects and qualitative social data. To help the Centre achieve this project has explored the benefits, concerns and challenges associated with the sharing and storage of qualitative and sensitive data in the context of disaster research, and has developed some guidelines to overcome these. Now, this was achieved through scoping reviews of international research centres, publishing houses and the grey in academic literature, as well as a workshop and interviews with key stakeholders. A desktop review of university data management plans and policies and frameworks was also undertaken, and this was followed by a final workshop to review the draft guidelines with members of the Centre and its social research community. Now, the research findings showed us that overall it is acknowledged that the collection of data is expensive and often paid for by public funds. The policies that from universities and publishing houses, it showed us that they are adapting their policies in line with this, the expectation that sharing of data is expected now. The participants of our workshops and our interviewees identified a range of pros and cons for data sharing, and these included, but were not limited to, positives in terms of reducing those costs and reducing the impact on participants. Some of the negatives that were discussed were associated with the cost of de-identifying data and difficulty in protecting identities and confidentiality. Now, participants did acknowledge that there are many different forms in which qualitative data is collected, but note that in most instances, participants focused on interview transcripts. Overall, protecting the participant drives researchers' concerns in relation to the sharing of qualitative data. Now, universities and publishers have taken the view that by using the appropriate process, participants can be protected and data can be shared. But let's explore why we should share the data. So some of the benefits around that relate to people's careers. It can, sharing your data can help fellow researchers and wider society by increasing discoverability of your work. It can foster new partnerships, and it can get work out early. Now, a range of different platforms, not just Taylor and Francis is where this information has come from. There were a range of different platforms that promoted the benefits of data sharing. And further to that, our interviewees did note the reduced burden on community, the potential cost savings, historical value that data can have. It can help guide future research. It gives the ability to analyse data from different discipline perspectives, and aggregating those smaller data sets into something larger can be highly beneficial. One of the interviewees from this research project quoted being able to actually pursue those good ideas that you've got a little bit of data on that other people might have a lot. I do think that there's some really huge advantages there. Further benefits to your career is to get credit for your work, increase those citations that a lot of researchers really do require, and that we're always striving for. Also enhancing the credibility of your work. So it's enabling others to scrutinise and replicate your work, which will help validate your research and your conclusions. In terms of benefits to the research community, again, scrutiny and validation, and also about that reuse and discoverability. Further benefits to the research community is about that reduced waste and preservation of data. And as noted earlier, interviewees and workshop participants noted that the collection of data is expensive and often paid for by public funds. So this really does, being able to reuse data does reduce that waste. There's also benefits to the society about the real world impact. So its wider public availability of data supports the visibility of research and its translation into education and practice. And it's about trust as well. It's like other open research practices, that transparency and accountability of data sharing helps maintain public trust and understanding of the research process. Highlighting again, and particularly in relation to research in disaster impact communities, interviewees perceived the sharing of data also reduces that burden on research participants as an added benefit to society. Interviewees highlighted that community members often engaged with researchers in the hope that their stories could assist the emergency service organisations and broader community. And interviewees perceived these community members would likely be willing to share their stories to facilitate this. So the sharing of data would recognise the value of those stories by enabling them to be shared more widely. Again, staying with Taylor and Francis, they did list 7 different challenges and concerns for why researchers are reluctant to share their data. I'm not going to go through them all. I'm sure that many of you are very much aware of these ones, and particularly because a lot of these concerns are definitely consistent with our research findings based on the discussions that we had during our workshop and interviews with various stakeholders. Now, interviewees and workshop participants also talked about, and we'll dive into a little bit deeper here around some of the challenges that they did identify, and it was definitely around that de-identification. That data, and the concerns were that data cannot be adequately de-identified, and when that is the case, it should not be shared. And de-identification is just not possible with all different forms of data, such as photos and videos. De-identification may require more than just the removal of names and addresses. And this is particularly important to when we're working in those smaller or very specialized communities, because there's different nuances with the way that people speak or the stories that they're telling, that other people will be, even though their names or addresses are removed from the transcripts or the data that we are storing and sharing, it still might not be enough. Others may still be able to identify those people. Interviewees and workshop participants also added quite a few more issues that were relating to consent. So in terms of consent, they noted that people may initially share their views that then potentially they may not be comfortable with or wouldn't have expressed later after the event. And it's really important that participants would have to be made aware of the intention to share the data and to give their consent. So making sure that it is communicated very well and that they are fully aware of that intention to share the data later on, and make sure that you do have that informed consent. I'm sure we've all come across them, and some of us, I know that I've been guilty of it, have developed consent forms that are very long and complicated. And there is that query around whether participants actually understand them. So it is about making sure that, can we simplify the consent form enough so that it is understood, but also that the message is getting across and people are fully aware of what they're signing up to. And consent given to participate in specific projects where they may not want to be part of a subsequent project for which the data is then used. So they're more than happy to give consent for the one that you're speaking to them about, but later on down the track, maybe that's something that they don't want to be a part of if it's a different type of project. They also talked about context. Thinking that there is a time limit of how long the data is valuable or useful, and that redaction gives rise to incomplete data sets. So then how useful is it if a lot of that context is removed from the data set? Difficulty in interpreting the data unless you're part of the team. Like if you're looking back on transcripts, you really lose that context as well, that can be captured just by observing during the interview process. Individual data items without context is not meaningful, and understanding the client's needs and their questions are an important part of the context. Further concern was raised around the impact on the researcher. So the sense of data ownership, where some people are quite concerned, where they've put a lot of that time, a lot of effort, and a lot of effort in securing the research funding, and feel that sense of ownership, where that's my data and that's mine. There's also that concern for the researcher, where they don't know how their data is going to be used in the future, and it might not sit well with them. It could be good or it could be bad, and it's that uncertainty about who is using it, how it will be used. Noting again, it takes that time and effort to design the questions, to collect the data, and how will researchers be compensated for that effort that they put in, and the subsequent projects don't need to go to such effort to be able to, when they can just reuse somebody else's data. And preparing data for sharing makes the project more complicated, so it takes a longer time. So these are all very real concerns from the various people that we spoke to. So following on from all of the concerns and challenges in the deep dive that we just did into some of those, what is the guidance to researchers on how they can go about data sharing? Now, we have noted that our interviewees raised a lot of ethical considerations in sharing, and many of them did note that they have not ever shared their data or taken steps to ensure their data is shareable. But despite all of that, a lot of the universities have been progressing work in this direction. And that is with the development of data management policies and frameworks that outline the requirement for researchers to submit data management plans. Now, data management plans are to be developed in line with human research ethics committees, and they really should consider and recognise the inherent complexities and uniqueness of every research project. So they're not a blanket approach to this, they really need to consider that. So the aforementioned concerns raised by interviewees and workshop participants are shared by many across the social research community, but they can be worked through with the support and guidance from university institutions, including their human research ethics committees, and as well as from the Australian Research Data Commons and Natural Hazards Research Australia. But also recognising in some cases, sharing just won't be an option. But it is important to note here that any access to and use of sensitive data, or data that has some restrictions placed on it, will be subject to data management plans and require human research ethics approvals. So further guidance to researchers accounting for those fair and care principles. The Australian Research Data Commons has a wide range of different tools and resources that researchers should be accessing to get more information around how this can be done. And some of the important ones there around the fair and care principles. As noted, universities are also doing a lot of work in this space, and there's some great examples there. One of the examples that we've got is from Massey University, where they do provide a lot of information around the fair and care principles. But a lot of other resources can be found on other university websites and also through the Australian Research Data Commons. Data management policies and frameworks, as we noted, many of the universities provide so much information on these, and more information is coming out. They're really developing a lot more tools and resources to help researchers work through how they should be developing their data management plans, what the best way for storage and the like is. So we've listed a few here that provide the video guides and training and education to help generate that awareness. And there's a lot of those how-to guides and toolkits. The ones that we have listed here, James Cook University, Massey University, Monash, University of South Australia, University of Western Australia, and University of Western Sydney. But this list is not exhaustive, so please look at your own universities and see what is there. If you can't find what you need, you can always contact your Human Research Ethics Committee and find out what is available. But these resources that we have linked here are open to the public, so you can just jump on one of the other university websites and see what work has progressed in that space. Now, in relation to disaster impacted communities, many interviewees that people affected by a disaster could be considered vulnerable, and that they had put in place specific practices to address this vulnerability. And as previously discussed, interviewees noted that the sharing of data collected at this time could reduce the burden that engaging in research could present to the community. It was also observed that under these conditions, it is important to assure the community member, as the research participant, is aware of the possibility that other researchers may access the data and for what reasons. Interviewees highlighted the importance of easy to read and easy to understand consent forms and participant information statements in such circumstances. Now, there's a lot of information that has come out from Converge and the Natural Hazards Centre at the University of Boulder. They do have guidance and tools and training resources as well, and this is specific to the natural hazards research community. So in addition to your own institutions, I do encourage you all to have a look at what is available internationally as well, particularly through the University of Boulder in Colorado. So how is sharing done? Well, there's a whole range of different things. Coming back to Taylor and Francis, they talk about a data availability statement that can go along with any publication, and that tells the reader where the research data associated with the paper is available and under what conditions it can be accessed. So whether it's freely open or it's restricted or is very sensitive and can't be shared. So that is something to consider. Universities, again, have how-to guides on how sharing is done and the resources. CQU has a Publishing Your Dataset video that demonstrates how to publish a dataset using their data manager and a data publishing checklist. Massey University provides detailed guidance on publishing and sharing data. Again, jump into your university and see what is available there. If you can't find what you need, have a look at some of the others. And these are just two of the examples of many. In terms of where research data is stored and published, so universities have their own databases. For example, the University of Western Australia has its Profiles and Research repository. Other data sets, either that open, mediated access or citation only, are published on, for example, Central Queensland University's Acquire. But many of them also use other external platforms, so they are discoverable. And we do have dataset search through Google. There's Figshare, there's Research Data, which is the Australian one. So again, have a look at what's out there, find out what the recommended ones are from your own institution. International examples, Nature does provide a list of various data repositories and some that are associated to the social sciences. And within this list is the qualitative data repository, where researchers can discover or deposit their data, and Design Safe. So Design Safe is the one that is linked through to Converge with the Natural Hazards Centre at the University of Boulder. There's a lot of information where the two link up and how and why, and around information around managing that data. But other Australian examples, the Research Data Australia is the data discovery service of Australian Research Data Commons, so ARDC. And ARDC is supported by the Australian Government through the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy Program. Research Data Australia helps you find, access and reuse data for research from over 100 Australian research organisations, government agencies and cultural institutions. Also, CSIRO has a data access portal As noted, many universities have their own data storage repositories, and ARDC has the link there. There's also the option of early publishing of datasets in data journals. University of Queensland describes data journals as that they are emerging as another channel for researchers to publish their research outputs, including data. Data journals are publications whose main aim is to expose data sets more widely and allow researchers to share their research data outputs. And that's something that can be done in addition to publications, can also help to get that data out before a publication comes out, or sometimes people would like to hold that data for a certain amount of time until they do have the opportunity to publish themselves from their own data and then get that data out. And this is where, if you have published data sets in data journals, they attract citations similarly to what any research paper does, and this is where you can help boost up your citation numbers. Examples of data management plans for the sharing of data. Again, a range of different ones are available internationally and also through your own institution. So again, please have a look at what they look like and have a play around with those. These are going to be a requirement in many different institutions for when you are putting in any application for research funding, or for a Human Research Ethics Committee approval process. You will need to consider data management plans in many cases. As discussed earlier about the consent form, it was really about making sure that consent forms are clear and concise and really simple and understandable, easy to read. This is an example of the consent form that we used for this project. You can see there that we've given people the option, noting that they're consenting to take part in an interview or focus group or workshop discussion, that they are aware that we're going to record it and do the audio recording, and that there will be a transcript produced from that. We gave participants the option to be listed as participants in this research. So if they did want to have their name in the final report to say that they contributed to it. We also gave people the opportunity to be identified in relation to direct quotes. And I think that this is quite important because people should give their time and energy to be able to share their views, their experiences, their stories. And in some cases, not all, people have those a strong connection to what they're saying and what they're sharing, and they do want to be identified with that. So out of respect, I think we do need to give participants that opportunity to be able to be identified. Note though, we have included it here as an opt-in to be identified. We wouldn't expect that it would be an opt-out. And our interviewees felt that the general perception of those they have interviewed in the context of post-event studies is that they are keen to have their stories told and would likely respond positively to this. But of course, there are exceptions, and each project is unique. And this is where that data management plans must be tailored to the individual project, in collaboration with the Human Research Ethics Committees to make sure that we are capturing those nuances. We're not saying that this should be a blanket approach to all projects. We need to be able to understand the different sensitivities and vulnerabilities of different projects and design our data management plans accordingly, including our consent forms that are associated with those. This is the second half of our consent form. Really noting here too about that working with highly vulnerable communities where they might not fully understand what data sharing means. So our questions here around that, as you can see, we're asking people whether they give consent to the sharing of their interview, transcripts for access by other researchers, and the different approval processes that might be applicable to those different types of sharing. With that, we also ask people whether they would like to have their name their name and affiliation, or de-identified data only, or they do not approve. So there's different levels in which people can approve. And of course, across a whole entire project, you might have a range of different approvals there. So part of the data can be shared, but not all of it, because in some instances, some participants have said do not approve, so their data must be removed from that data set. Now, when we're talking about working with vulnerable and sensitive communities, this could mean, for example, working with children or with people with an intellectual disability. Also working with people whose first language is not English. In that case, every effort must be made to provide the information in the consent forms in their own language, and as noted earlier, in a very simplified form so people do understand it, dependent on the case of who we're working with. So the default position is that data sharing must not occur unless it's explicitly granted to through this consent form. Focus group data may not be shared unless all participants consented to data sharing. However, you could potentially edit some of the focus group information to remove respondents who said that they do not approve to be a part of that. But also you need to be careful about losing the context of the conversation as well. So it can be quite challenging, and it is noted. Overall, as you've probably gathered through the last 5 or 6 slides, always refer to your institution. In the first instance, you should go to your institution to find out information on developing a data management plan, collecting consent and whether reconsent might be needed, and selecting that appropriate data repository dependent on the type of data that you're collecting and the consent attached to that data, and how to publish your data as standalone pieces in those data journals. As noted, there is a wealth of information from ARDC that keeps growing, but also there's a wealth of information from your own institutions. You can also go to the international sources, including the publishing houses and journal websites. They also have a lot of information there too. Following best practice as outlined by the universities and the ARDC will ensure that data management plans are tailored to the individual project in collaboration with your ethics committees, and always noting that participants have the right to say how, if at all, their data is shared. And researchers have the right to argue the extent to which their data is shared as well. So it's not a blanket approach. We know that there's a lot of different nuances for every single project, and we need to be flexible around those, but we need to also consider all of the benefits as well in terms of data sharing. So on the basis of the findings of this project, the following guidelines were proposed to Natural Hazards Research Australia. And the guidelines are that the Centre continues to commit to data sharing as first principles, and the Centre implements a policy that requires any EOIs to explicitly include a data management plan, and this will ensure appropriate data management is incorporated into the project from the outset, including any associated costs to ensure that data is accessible. So that's in terms thinking about the cost of researchers' time needed to de-identify data. Researchers should work with their respective institutions according to their data management policies and using their resources for upskilling, but also looking outside at what else is available. And I'm sure the Centre will help guide researchers in that in that endeavour. The Centre will also encourage researchers and end users to follow best practice as outlined by universities or the Australian Research Data Commons. And the Centre is going to be part of that culture change needed by promoting the training and upskilling and sharing as an expectation. This includes encouraging researchers to access shared data alongside sharing any new data collected. So that's one of the things that we can be thinking about in our EOIs is what data might already be available out there, and is it available for sharing instead of always going out and collecting a new data set. So I hope this has given you a really good overview of the pros and cons around data sharing and what we can do to become better at data sharing, and considering about how we can still maintain the integrity of our work, and particularly around maintaining the protection of participants, and particularly the people that we work with in the environments that we do. So thank you very much for your time today.